Okay, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, but I think that the reason why Trump keeps returning to the January 6th hearings and to the idea that the election was stolen from him is the reason that he was elected. Trump is still very much in touch with the fact that he was elected because people were disappointed with the government and with elites. They had been screwed over multiple times, especially the middle class and business owners in the 2008 recession. So to keep that through line alive of the elites against the everyman, Trump continues to repeat what this issue.
Is Trump the only person capable of putting this? DeSantis can't do it. Tim Scott can't do it. Mike Pence can't do it. Nikki Haley can't do it. Are you saying that Trump is the only living Republican in America that can continue this conversation to bring real light on people who are struggling with pocketbook issues? The economy is tanking. Interest rates are soaring. Trump is the only person?
I don't think he's the only person, right? So, for example, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has shown that there can be economic lessons to be learned from pushing back against bureaucracy, against elites, and against the federal government. But Trump is still a powerful symbol, and that's what he represents, right? He represents, like Ed was saying, his attitude, his demeanor that is completely unlike what you see in Washington, that's what people want to keep alive and borrow from.
But do we need it to be president again? Do we? No, answer that for me. Do we need that to be president again?
It's not necessary, but the polls say he's still very popular.
Here's what I find fascinating. Are the people I have so much respect for. You ask why people continue and Trump continues to believe what he believes and continue to push forward. You're hearing it here from Ed and from Joshua, because this is what people say to him. So he will never accept any kind of responsibility. He will always believe that he's the only person that can move America forward and return America to prosperity. And I will say this. I think many Americans believe that there are other people in the party that can do the same. This president has been divisive. This president has not always had the best discipline. He's not always used the best judgment when he sent out tweets. And he certainly could have, in many ways, handled January 6th much better than the way it actually unfolded, okay? To exempt him of any responsibility, any accountability, we all become enablers. Because I'm willing to tell you this, and this is a fact. If this was a Democratic president, under the same circumstances, Ed Martin and Joshua would be having a whole different tune during this discussion today. And we've got to rise to always embrace the truth, not parties, not ideologues. We must always embrace the truth and what's best for Americans. We've auctioned too much to political parties and to labels to the point of where our country continues to rot away and become even more divisive because we are unwilling to stand on truth. And then if we stand on truth, let the people still decide. We'll be back. And welcome back to the broadcast. John Keyes is a former CIA operative, and he also joins the conversation. Now, I don't know if many Americans realize this. 400,000 Ukrainians are now in America looking for a way of life. Over 100,000 people from Afghanistan are in this country. Hundreds of thousands of migrants are in this country. They're dropping them off in places like Pennsylvania, Virginia, trying to do it in Washington, D.C., providing their education, providing IDs, providing health care, providing job opportunities, and Americans continue to suffer. Can you imagine the burden this is happening on these different cities, trying to provide, and then many of them are living on the streets because they've not found homes for them, okay? Union Station, go to Union Station, you can see this. And I asked our CIA operative, they drop them off in the middle of the night while they think everybody is sleeping. Do they have any kind of compassion and concern for the impact that this has happened on the lives of everyday Americans and the already struggling economy that we're facing?
Yeah, I think that this is a consequence of Democrats and this sitcom administration's obsession with optics, right? In part, the Biden administration is moving all of these migrants, especially on the southern border, to these other areas because they don't want overcrowding. They don't want reporters taking pictures of their holding facilities like they did under Trump. So they decide to put the problem on other people in other areas. The fact that we're seeing an outcry from the large cities, like New York City, Mayor Eric Adams complained about it last week. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser said that migrants are being tricked onto buses, right? That's very unkind, but also a sign that if the big cities with resources are struggling with these migrants, I do feel for the rural areas that we are not hearing about in the national press.
Let me turn to you, Joshua. What is it that Manchin and Schumer has agreed to in this new version of Build Back America?
They've actually cut back a lot in the bill that's coming up. There was some work on the semiconductor industry that the White House is hoping will be a big win for them. But again, I don't think the working class is really going to see the benefits of this in a way that will benefit them in the midterms coming up, right? Like some analysts have noted that the infrastructure bill they passed last year, only a quarter of Americans know that happened, right? So as much as this may look like a breakthrough for our Congress, their approval ratings are still remarkably low.
I wanted to ask our operative to stay with us because I think this is something that's very important. Because I think the American people get duped and so manipulated often. And one thing that we try to do here is just deal with the facts. I try not to be political. I want to be a referee. We want to present all voices and all sides. I saw an article that when lies finally come home full circle. And the story was about how the mainstream media for the last several months have been lying to the American people about the true situation in the Russian and Ukrainian conflict and war. You would have the impression that the Ukrainians are making progress, they have the Russians on their heels, they're going to win this. But this article is telling us that in a few weeks, reality is about to set in about the real situation and the real predicament that the Ukrainians and Zelensky now find themselves in. Joshua?
We're taking everybody.
Yeah, I think that most of us can agree, all of us can agree that Russia invading Ukraine was uncalled for and is a violation of sovereign and human rights. But I think that our tendency to make everyone a celebrity is really masking some of the underlying problems that Ukraine had up until very recently, right? In international indices of corruption, Ukraine is pretty high up there, right? Very close to Russia. And even the one Ukrainian-born representative in Congress, Victoria Sparks, she has also warned that we need oversight of the money that we're sending over there. We've approved millions, billions of dollars in aid, and we don't know where it's going. There are reports of some of those arms cropping up in the black market, cropping up in these spaces that the troops are not receiving.
Ed, when you listen to this, you ask yourself, is it that the media is being hoodwinked? Are they believing the propaganda? Because I would find it hard to believe knowingly they would continue this narrative.
No, this is definitely the media misleading the American people, right? Like they have to set up a contrast to the way it was under Trump, right? Trump represented chaos. Trump represented a shaking up of the establishment. So they're trying to return everything back to the liberal world order, right? They want to present a good and evil narrative. They want to present the idea that everything has returned to normal, but you can't change the lived experience of, everyday Americans and the Ukrainians who are fleeing from Russian bombardment.
You made a point, Joshua, during the break. Because I really want Americans to see life for what it is in war, not just what is manufactured. We talked about the fact how they're being forced to pose for Vogue magazine.
Yeah, so recently, if you didn't see, President Zelensky and his beautiful wife were they posed for Vogue magazine, but I don't think that was really their choice, right? I see a lot of critics criticizing the Ukrainian politicians because, you know, they should be doing better things. But I feel like they felt like they had to because they need outside help. They need support from the European Union. They need support from the U.S. And I think they do understand that in part we are a media-driven society now. So even though it looks duplicitous or not genuine, they're still driven to it because they see that as just another tactic to raise awareness and keep the Ukraine war in the news.
You know, Joshua, in my economics, 2 consecutive quarters of contraction is a recession.
Yeah, so the Washington Post was did not wait to jump on President Trump when he had 2 quarters of contraction as well. The Washington Post fact-checked him and said, oh, this is in fact a recession, even though Trump did not. And our economy was hyperinflated because our Democrats and the Biden administration have placed their priorities too far in the future, right? They've been praying for this energy transition to happen like they are with the current bill, and it's been passed on to consumers. You hear this phrase, support the transition, asked from our politicians, from Democrats, to the everyday person. And I agree with the guest that says that this is going to be harmful to the economy. Just because they're spending money doesn't mean it's going to reach the average American who is struggling to make ends meet, who has had to surrender their family dog or can no longer afford to go out to eat. The Americans aren't going to see it the same way that the Democrats are, but the administration has kind of deceived itself into thinking this is not a recession so that they can continue looking past the everyday American to their pet causes.
But how do we continue to be less reliant on China, Joshua, and return to manufacturing?
It's already happening, right? So China, under Xi Jinping, has implemented a zero-COVID policy that has basically paralyzed their economy. The supply chains have been snarled once again after Shanghai shut down earlier this year. So you see a lot of, reshoring, I think that's the term for it, where businesses are finding ways to come back to the U.S. And America provides solutions for these problems, right? Like, we still have oil production that is untapped, that is hesitant to invest because of this hostile administration. There are so many issues that you can turn to within to solve, and this administration is just refusing to do that.
So, Robert, how do we solve this affordable housing crisis?
Build more houses. That's part of it. What we've seen with regards to housing supplies is that builders have simply been stockpiling assets because they can drive up prices because you get unprecedented demand. This is what I was talking about when I said we had an overheating housing market, for example, in Q1 that has now seen a correction. You have to make investments into affordable housing. You have to make investments into infrastructure nationwide. With regards to transitioning to the quote-unquote green economy, that is a large portion of it by creating the type of infrastructure we built here domestically. As you look at what's happening in, let's say, the EU and even in China, they've all made commitments to go completely green by 2035. America is lagging far behind in all of these areas. So it's interesting to me that Republicans, for some reason, have this conceptualization that America's supposed to have a leadership position in the world, but yet and still lag behind every other industrialized and even developing nation when it comes to transitioning to the energy source of the future. We've been fighting oil and petro wars for the last half century, including the current war in Ukraine is a petro war. The best way to take power away from these despots and dictators around the world is to make sure we're producing and living off of green energy right here in the United States of America.
But that's not what's happening in Europe at all. Germany has fallen back. The reason why Russia has leverage over Europe is because of the green transition. Germany and Italy are still buying buckets of Russian oil and gas because they shut down their nuclear reactors, they closed shale fields. Environmental emissions have gone up over the past couple months because of their green policies, because they have to fire up coal power plants again, and because they can't quit Russian oil. NATO actually reported in 2014 that Russia was lobbying these green environmental groups to push their policies so that they would be more dependent on Russian oil. And now you're seeing the consequence. If we want to ensure security for ourselves, we have to be energy independent, and that does involve some domestic production. Just because it's green doesn't mean that you don't find that energy somewhere else. Germany went green, but they still had to buy the energy that they lost from Russia, and now they're paying the price.
I want to thank all our guests for joining us today for this fascinating discussion. We covered so many topics and issues around the world. Ed, Robert, Josh, Patrice, our CIA operative at WGLA 24/7. I'm Armstrong Williams for another edition